This is Genocide, Gary Graham's shocking last words before execution. On June 22, 2000, the small Texas town of Huntsville braced for a storm unlike any other. Inside the red brick walls of the Walls unit, Gary Graham, who called himself Shaka Sankofa, prepared for his final hours. His case had become one of the most controversial in American history. A teenage boy sentenced to die based on the testimony of a single eyewitness, with no physical evidence to back it up. For 19 years, he fought the system, insisting on his innocence. While voices around the world, civil rights leaders, celebrities, even the Pope pleaded for his life. Yet the state of Texas was determined to carry out his execution. Tonight, we step inside his last 24 hours, a story of resistance, faith, and defiance. Welcome back, friends. This is the kind of truth rarely told. If you believe these stories must be heard, subscribe now and join us for more real-life prison documentaries. Dear friends, on the morning of June 22, 2000, the Texas sun rose hot and heavy over Huntsville. Inside the towering red brick prison known as the Walls unit, one man sat in silence on death watch. His name was Gary Graham, though in his later years he had taken on the name Shaka Sankofa, a name he said reclaimed his dignity and African heritage. To the state, he was prisoner number 696. To his supporters, he was a man condemned not by proof, but by a system blind to justice. And to the family of Bobby Lambert, the man killed outside a Houston Safeway in 1981, he was a cold-blooded killer whose sentence had taken far too long. But this case was never that simple. At 17 years old, Gary Graham was convicted of shooting Bobby Lambert during a robbery. The trial lasted just 2 days. No fingerprints tied him to the scene. No weapon was recovered. And the bullet taken from Lambert's body didn't match the .22 caliber pistol police found on Graham days later. The conviction rested almost entirely on one eyewitness, Bernardine Skillern, a woman who testified she saw Graham fire from about 30 feet away. Her account never wavered, but doubts haunted the case from the start. Several alibi witnesses swore Graham had been elsewhere at the time, yet none were called to testify. His defense attorney, inexperienced and ill-prepared, failed to raise critical challenges. Prosecutors leaned heavily on Graham's week-long string of armed robberies in the area, 10 in total, but none of those involved the fatal shooting. Still, it was enough to brand him dangerous. And with that, the jury returned a guilty verdict. By the end of 1981, Gary Graham was sentenced to death. For the next 19 years, he lived inside the steel and concrete of Texas death row. His appeals wound through state courts, federal courts, and finally to the U.S. Supreme Court. At least 33 judges reviewed his case. Each time, the outcome remained the same. The sentence stood. But Gary Graham was no longer the same teenage boy who had stood trial. Inside the Palunsky unit, he transformed into Shaka Sankofa, adopting a name rooted in African tradition. To him, it symbolized redemption, a rebirth of the self. To many outside the prison walls, it became a rallying cry. Shaka Sankofa wasn't just another inmate. He became a symbol of everything critics said was broken in the American justice system. Civil rights leaders rallied behind him. Actor Danny Glover visited his cell. Coretta Scott King, Desmond Tutu, and even Pope John Paul II pleaded for mercy. Amnesty International made him a poster case for wrongful conviction. And yet, the state of Texas remained unmoved. To them, the evidence had been weighed, the courts had spoken, and justice demanded closure. June 22, 2000. After years of reprieves and last-minute stays, the clock finally ran out. By dawn, Gary Graham refused breakfast, taking only coffee. He told guards he would not dine at the table of those who planned to kill him. His mood was calm, even defiant, though his body still bore bruises from the fight he'd put up the night before when officers came to move him. It had taken 5 men to wrestle him down and drag him into the transfer van. Outside the prison walls, Huntsville braced for chaos. Hundreds of protesters gathered, chanting, "Free Shaka Sankofa." Drums echoed through the heat. Students, activists, and church leaders held signs, praying for a miracle. On the other side of the barricades, nearly 200 officers in riot gear stood ready. And then came a shocking sight: members of the new Black Panther Party on one side, and Ku Klux Klan members on the other. They faced each other in a tense standoff, both claiming Huntsville's streets as their ground. What should have been a solemn day of justice looked more like a battlefield. Inside, Graham's legal team worked furiously. Motion after motion was filed: claims of ineffective counsel, lack of physical evidence, and constitutional violations. The U.S. Supreme Court issued a temporary stay, halting the execution for just a few hours. Outside, the crowd erupted in hope. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But the reprieve was short-lived. By a narrow 5-4 vote, the court lifted the stay. Governor George W. Bush, then running for president, issued a statement affirming the decision. The people of Texas can be assured that Gary Graham is guilty of capital murder and has received the due process our American system guarantees. With that, the road was cleared. As night fell, officers entered Graham's holding cell. He resisted again, forcing them to strap his wrists, waist, and even his head as they carried him to the chamber. When the curtain opened, witnesses saw a man bound tightly to the gurney, his eyes blazing with fury. He was given the chance to speak, and for 10 minutes he did angry, passionate, unrelenting. "I did not kill Bobby Lambert," he shouted. "This is genocide in America. You can kill a revolutionary, but you cannot stop the revolution. The revolution will go on." He called his execution a lynching, a state-sanctioned killing of a black man by a system that never gave him a fair chance. His words carried through the glass to 12 witnesses, including members of Lambert's family and his own supporters. Even as the injection began to flow, Graham did not fall silent. His final words echoed with defiance. "We will gain our freedom and liberation in this country. We will do it by any means necessary." At 8:49 in the evening, Gary Graham was pronounced dead. He was 36 years old. Outside the prison walls, the chants of "Free Shaka Sankofa" rose into the night, but inside the red brick building, silence fell. For some, justice had been served. For others, an innocent man had just been executed. The debate never ended. Supporters pointed out that Graham's conviction relied on a single eyewitness, a method proven unreliable in countless cases since. His alibi witnesses were never heard. The forensic evidence never tied him to the scene, and doubts lingered even after his death. But opponents argued just as strongly. Gary Graham admitted to 10 armed robberies that same week, and in their eyes, he was a predator who had brought violence to his community. In the end, what made his case so unforgettable wasn't just the crime or the execution, it was the clash between doubt and certainty, justice and injustice, life and death. Dear friends, Gary's story reminds us that behind every headline lies a human being flawed, complex, and fragile in the face of power. Whether you believe he was guilty or wrongfully condemned, his final words echo still. You can kill a revolutionary, but you cannot stop the revolution. If you want more stories that uncover the final 24 hours on death row, subscribe and join us on this journey.